Just wanted to ask Hannah, please can you remind everybody that if you want to say something, use the raise hand function, and then we can allow you to put your hand up, but later on. Then we can allow you to put your camera on, sorry, later on. But yeah, if you could give everyone a reminder of that when we get going, Hannah, that'd be great. Chloe, are you back?
Yes, I am here.
Brilliant. Okay, I think we'll start. Hello, everybody. My name's Tyrone Wolfe. I'm the chair of Deaf Rainbow UK. I have been so for 3.5 years. So I'm very excited to set up this event. We'll be having a look at a book that's been published called The Queen's English. It's full of lots of different jargon to do with the LGBTQ plus community. It's got lots of vocabulary and specific phrases and things, all sorts of things. It's a wonderful book. And it's been published recently. So yeah, well, we're here today because Deaf Rainbow UK, since our inception, we've been trying to set up a glossary. And you'll have a look on, if you have a look on our website, you'll find it. You can have a look later. And we've got lots of different vocabulary there. And you'll see that we're not finished. There's some terms that we've got in English, but we don't have a specific sign for. So, you know, do we create one? Will the community as a whole naturally create one? So we thought we'd have a chat with Chloe Davis, who's here with us today. And welcome to Chloe, about her book, which is full of all this fantastic jargon. Hi, Chloe.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So the structure chapter, Tyrone's screen has frozen. So we'll be chatting with Chloe about how that book came to be, how people were involved in the creation of that book, and then we'll invite the audience later to ask questions about the book specifically. And then after that, we'll have a look at the Deaf Rainbow UK glossary. How does it work? How do we think about our next steps? You know, if some words don't have a sign that corresponds to them, and some signs don't have a word that corresponds to them. So what are our next steps? So maybe Chloe can give us some tips or some advice based on her experience. So the aim for today is not to think of lots of different ideas, it's just to have a bit of a chat and share our thoughts and experiences. Okay. So Chloe, would you like to give us like a basic rundown of how your idea for this book started? What were the steps you took? How did you get going?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Deaf Rainbow UK, for having me and celebrating the Queen's English. This is a dictionary that celebrates over 800 terms used to describe our collective LGBTQIA plus experiences. It was created to celebrate, affirm, bring visibility to the language, the history, the culture, and the pride that we have in our community. It was a tool also to bring about more inclusivity and to show the true diversity of human identity, right? The spectrum of human identity, the pride in who we are. So this dictionary, I started writing it actually in 2006. So it's been over 15 years of research. There is a US version, that was the initial version. And this year, actually, the UK version was published. And I'm very excited that Paula Afghan was my forward writer, as well as served as a research tool for celebrating again the UK queer history. And so the dictionary, when I talk about inclusivity and when I talk about diversity, I always say that I wanted a research tool that celebrated my identity, right? So if I were to say words that I use to celebrate who I am a proud Black, bisexual, demisexual, biromantic woman. And I say all of these terms because they truly affirm me and who I am. And with this resource, researching this resource, it allowed me to stand more firm into my most authentic self. Because what I was realizing, of course, back in 2006 and beyond, that there weren't a lot of resources that dived into the narratives, experiences, and stories of those who were not heterosexual, were not cisgender, right? So I didn't openly meet someone who was bisexual until, I want to say, my early 20s. It was very much gay or straight, right? These binaries, this homonormativity of binaries, right? And I realized that that's not right. There's more to us. There's more layers. There's more beautiful complexity to us. And I wanted to dive into creating a resource that did that. And so over my 15 years of research, I've just sat with lots of different communities, whether it be the lesbian community, whether it be the gay community, the bisexual community. I like to say the TGNC, which is transgender nonconforming communities, or transgender nonconforming non-binary communities, the aromantic and even the asexual communities, because we all have language that articulates our being, right? And as this conversation today, particularly with Death Rainbow UK, is that we need language and we need signs, right? Sign language to be able to articulate our journeys, right? With our identity. And so that's what this dictionary is. It's truly just a resource to dive into the beautiful layers of who we are. And it's that beautiful complexity of our race, right? It's the beautiful complexity of our religion, our first language, our sexual orientation, our sexual anatomy, but also our gender identity that lives up here and our gender expression that lives out here. And how can we writing this dictionary again is to bring the visibility to celebrate the many identities that are out, that exist, that have language, but just wasn't documented. So that is the premise of the Queen's English. And as I flip through, it's very, very colorful. It's very engaging because I wanted to create a resource that wasn't just a celebration or an educational tool, but also that was beautiful, that really represents the colorful nuances of our gay and queer community, right? Whether that be our pride flags, plural, right? Because it's not enough to just have the pride, progress pride flag that should color that shows the demi boy or demi gender or a romantic or polysexual or pansexual. That's the pride and inclusivity that I wanted to show in this dictionary.
Fantastic. Has frozen.
We're just asking if Tyron can go back. His video froze, just to make sure that the interpreter is as complete as possible. Bear with us a moment. A little technical hiccup. So Max is just asking if Tyron can start his question again. And now Tyron is saying that we're frozen to him.
Okay. Okay.
before I just
continue talking, because I'm definitely diving into, you know, what this beautiful collaboration and conversation between, you know, deaf, but it's also about what does inclusivity look like when we talk about sign language, and it's so beautiful that Deaf Rainbow UK has that talks about these identities. And one thing I love to do, and that's part of my website, it's called Inside the Queen's English, but I dive into conversations that talk about identity and language around identity. And one of my first interviews I did was with Jacinda, what it's like being part of the deaf community and also queer. Understanding that when you are part of the TGNC forming non-binary communities, that, you know, there are a plethora of ways we identify ourselves, pronouns we can use, right? And right, but we can also say she or ear. Like, there's so many different pronouns that we can use, but how do we sign these different pronouns, right? Is that something that we need to continue to create, so that way we have particular sign language for the pronouns, for our gender identities, right? How do we go about that? And I just thought that was a beautiful conversation. And I think that this is something that we can talk about currently, is, again, the power of language. Language is used to affirm, celebrate, and bring visibility to our identities, right? The spectrum of identities. And how do we go about that, where we honor our identities, we honor the people's stories, and we're also respectful, whether we're inside of the community or not. And one thing we talked about is language, right? What is the sign for gay? What's the sign for lesbian, right? And then who's allowed to use those signs, right? If there's a particular sign that is created for gay and for lesbian, is it just those who are part of the gay and lesbian, or gay and lesbian community who are deaf, or can also those outside of the community use it? And that was an idea that we were talking about. And I think it's more appropriate that if you are part of the community, right? When I say part of the community, gay, lesbian, and I'm just using these particular identities right now. Of course, there are so many more, but gay, lesbian, and having a sign for that, that you are part of the deaf community, that you get to use that sign. But if you are not part of the deaf community, then you have to spell it out, right? Because it's a sense of respect. And it's also a sense of making sure that we are celebrating and affirming someone's identity, right? So that's the type of conversation that I would love to dive into, again, because we want to make sure that we create language that feels affirming. And we also want to teach others how to be more compassionate and respectful to our beautiful identities, right? The layers of beautiful identities. So I think, Tyrone, you're back.
I know a bit from the chat that you can see me. I can only see you on and off, so I don't know what's happening with the Wi-Fi. But if you can see me, I can see the captions. So I'll carry on. I'll try to just keep going. So apologies for that. Apologies for my technical issues. Right, so I wanted to ask a question of you, Chloe. Firstly, thank you for telling us all about your book. I want to know, did you find that people were interested to be involved and to take part in those discussions and share their ideas? Or did you have to persuade them to get on board and to contribute? What was the relationship like with the people who contributed to the book? Because we've tried as Deaf Rainbow UK to kind of ask people for their ideas, and we found it quite difficult to persuade people to engage with that process and to encourage people to come forward. So we was wondering if you've had a similar experience or if you had a different one.
Thank you for sharing. I want to say with the dictionary, I was very much supported, and people were very eager and excited to share language, because I think I was saying, I want to create this resource, a dictionary of our language, and everyone who I met were hands-on to say absolutely, and openly transparently and compassionately share their stories with language that either, and why the dictionary continues to grow and grow, and we collected language amongst ourselves. And then what was happening is friends would introduce me to other friends, and then friends of their friends would introduce me to friends or family members or coworkers. And so it continued to grow. So definitely within the 15 years, I was very supported with documenting language, because I think everyone understood that there was a common need to have this resource, and also a common want to celebrate who we are, right? I also think time makes a difference. It was very different in 2006 versus in 2021 going into 2022, is because now we do have more resources, whether they be online, right? Which the beautiful glossary that you're talking about with Deaf Rainbow UK, we have more resources. So I think now more people are willing to want to share, to know that it is okay to share these type of resources, to have these conversations. But I do also understand kind of the, not necessarily, it's not a pushback, but I understand the slow participation in things because of understanding, also feeling valued, right? And understood. And I also want to say that there were times of that as well, not as much, but there were times to say, well, you know, is my story also going to be part of this conversation? Because what we realize a lot of times is that when we are creating something, we don't always have that mind of inclusivity to share so many people's experiences. A lot of times it's more monolithic, where, you know, the majority or the majority view is held at a certain esteem, and those who are minority in whatever way, whether we're talking about race, whether we're talking about abilities, whether we're talking about sexual orientation, but the minorities, right? Their stories, our stories are not always told or included. So I think that there's a sense of trust to say, well, will you truly tell my story, right? So there was a great support in this. And I think more support will come from each other when we know that resources are going to be created and respected in a way that empowers us all. So I do hope that maybe even this conversation, and since it will be, you know, here forever and forevermore, will encourage more people to want to come, you know, to Deaf Rainbow UK and bring these type of resources so we all feel affirmed, right? Because it's not enough to, you know, just have textual language. We also have to have sign language, right? That's inclusivity, that's power, you know, that's lifting us all up.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think that's a very useful background to your book. I'm now going to ask some questions to the audience, or give the opportunity for questions to be asked by the audience. So I'm just asking the audience, if you have any questions for Chloe about the book, can you please raise your hand in the chat, and then we'll be able to turn your cameras on, or if you want to use English, you can always type your questions into the chat as well. So it's up to you. Do we have any questions from the audience?
This is, but it's also just engaging and also be part of the conversation as what needs to happen, so that way we have this type of inclusivity and representation of all identities, right? And we also celebrate what it is like to be LGBTQIA+ and part of the deaf community. What is that beautiful experience and what needs to be done so we celebrate that experience that feels good, that feels right, and feels affirming.
Exactly. I think maybe one useful question from me is if we're talking about being prescriptive or prescribing terms. So it could be that people are saying, this is the word, this is your word, this is the word that you have to use. And maybe some people would say, I actually don't use that terminology about myself. It may be a new term that's not familiar to them. And so is there a problem maybe with the dictionary? It becomes a kind of prescriptive pressure on people. Oh, I have to use these terms. And so what's the relationship maybe between the dictionary itself, knowing that there are people who use this terminology, this language, to celebrate their identities. Actually, some people don't use those terms to describe themselves. And what's that?
So what I made sure to write in the dictionary, and I write this in my introduction, is that I say that not all members of the community use this language or know this language. But what this was a collection of language that is used. So it is not saying that you have to use this language, that you must conform to this word, that you have to even stay within this identity or using this language to express your identity. This is truly just a resource and guide to say, wow, look at all of the words that we use in our language collectively and all of the stories that are presented within our world, within our Gay queer community. And I particularly say that, I also like to say that who we are and our identity is ours and ours alone. And we don't have to necessarily give a word to that. We don't have to give a label to that. There's actually a term in here that says no label, and I can read that for a second. But it's for individuals that say, no, I don't like a language. I don't like to be confined. I don't like to be in this box, right? Because society does that sometimes. Society makes us have to be within the conformity of a box or a position or a thought or an action. And that's not just that we are vibrant, we are diverse, and we're complex. And I encourage, us all to understand that first and foremost, not everyone has to use it. I also say that we use it different ways because our experiences are very different, and how someone identifies a word could be very different from how someone else identifies it. And guess what? Both are valid, both are equal, both should be celebrated. And then it's also enough to say that those who are not part of our community, please do not assume, again, that we all identify the same way. It's not monolithic, it is diverse, it is on a spectrum. And so the dictionary is not to confine things. The dictionary is to celebrate the diversity and help us all understand not just language, but the history of language and why language was created. And it's also just a way to say that language will also evolve and change, and be aware of that. It is not a staple. It is not, this is not like a standing document. I think it's a floating document because it's going to forever change, because we're going to forever evolve. And that's the beautiful part about it, the celebration. So I think, when we think of the word dictionary, we think of it being the staple and this definitive thing, but actually the Queen's English Dictionary is not that. It is just a resource to understand where we have been and where we are going and where we are today, and how can we make our society, again, more inclusive, to understand the diversity. How can we be more respectful and compassionate, again, to our beautiful differences, And I actually was going to read no label for you in the dictionary. So I'm going to flip through here. So we have no label. And it's interesting because you see this color spectrum here. And I was talking about the color of the dictionary and also how I include the pride flags. And so we actually use this page because we have non-binary here to just highlight the non-binary flag, but I'm going to read no label. no label, adjective, describing a person who does not identify with any gender or sexuality labels. And I'm going to read a usage example because each term actually has a usage example. It says, I don't have a label. I would like no label. I feel that one of the joys of being a gay man is that I have all the masculine and macho stuff, but I also can be a queen. Freedom to be, no apologies. And that was a quote by James Beeman. And this is when we talked about contributions. You know, when I would have conversations with, you know, different individuals about language, you know, there was just some captivating things people would say. And when I could, I would quote them in our usage example. And then there's also a component that says, it's our synonym section, and it says, want more info? Think a label against using sexuality or gender stereotypes, right? So it's not enough to just say, oh, this person, you know, is queer and you have to be queer, or this person is gay, or this person is trans, or this person is, you know, aromantic. It's just like, no, I don't want a label. I just want to be and exist. And I want society and the world to just accept me as who I am. And I don't have to be something for you. So that's something we talked about a lot.
Thank you. That's very useful, I think. I know that there's lots of sign language interpreters who often ask Deaf Rainbow UK, what's the sign for non-binary, or what's the sign for whichever term they're looking for, you know, they, them, etc. if they're talking about pronouns. And often we would say, well, we can't really prescribe. You have to see the language that people are using. And sometimes interpreters expect to arrive in a meeting and then have this automatic vocabulary that they can use, but that may not be a vocabulary that people in the meeting recognize or understand. And so we need to be careful about that, I would say, as within the deaf community. We also have a question from Geordie Mason-Jones. I think he's just popped something into, I think if we can have Geordie's video, I think he's got his hand up. So I think Geordie wants to ask a question. Hold on one moment. Ah, there we are. Hi. Yes, so Geordie's now joining with the camera. We see Geordie. Hello, everybody. My name is Geordie. I'm a trans non-binary person. I think Tyrone wants me to talk about the use of pronouns, they and them. So my personal pronouns are they, them, but as a deaf person, I'm also a deaf person and I use sign language. And we don't really have pronouns in the same way that you might have in English. I mean, maybe if you're using sign-supported English or something like that, then you could maybe say she and he. They, you could say something as a plural marker is recognized in BSL, but typically we point to our pronouns, and so they're not gendered at all.
Yes.
Obviously, when you're writing, then you need to make sure that you use appropriate pronouns in English, but otherwise pronouns themselves are non-gendered in BSL. Tyrone? Geordie, thanks very much. I think that's really useful because I remember when you joined us, my immediate response was, in sign language, there are no gender specific signs really. But in some ways, I suppose my thought was also then, who am I to decide? It's useful to have that discussion just to make sure that that is what our mutual understandings are. Obviously, I can't say what something is or isn't, because language is always something which evolves and changes. And obviously, it's valuable for us to have these discussions and to consider different people's perspectives. And as you said, Geordie, you know, sometimes we may not talk about it in sign language in a gendered way, but if we're wanting to then write an email or send you a text, then we need to make sure that we're using appropriate pronouns. So thanks, Geordie, for that. Chloe, I don't know if there are any thoughts from you on that. Oh, I think Geordie's just got one more thing to say. Geordie, over to you. just one thing to add. I really am enjoying new pronouns, Faye and fair. I really would love to try that. But for me, I'm also unclear how I'll be able to do that in BSL to make sure that if I were using a different pronoun, how can I make sure if it's an interpreter that they're actually using the kind of neo-pronouns that I'm using? And of course, some people may think fae is something like fairy. And so it could be like, I don't know. I mean, maybe you should refer to me as fairy. I don't think that would work well in BSL. It doesn't kind of work in the language. But at the moment, I'm kind of playing with those notions as well. I'm enjoying that space.
Thank you, Jordi.
Chloe.
Yes. So I was speaking earlier with Tyrone, and I was saying that I like to do these videos called Inside the Queen's English, and I want to dive deeper into language. And I actually love this conversation we're having now, because it feels like the Inside the Queen's English, because we're diving into language. And one of my first videos I did, it was on pronouns, right? And it was with Jacinda, and we talked about pronouns and identifying pronouns in the deaf community. And they actually, because it was a beautiful awakening, because Jacinda didn't know that. She's like, I didn't know you can use she, they. It's like, absolutely, you could do anything you want. So saying that, I want to first say that I learned that in sign language, you point, right? So it's not about gender. But I want to empower what you were saying, Jordi. You said you like this place and experience of figuring out Fae. And that's the thing. This dictionary grew not because, someone gave permission or the outside said permission to say, make a word. It's because someone said, I'm going to make a word that feels affirming, or a community said, I'm going to create something that feels affirming, that feels right. And it felt right to other people. And that's why we have language. That's why in the ballroom scene, if we watch RuPaul's Drag Race, we know words like read and shade and over and fierce, right? But these words came from the ballroom scene that was created in the late 1960s in Harlem, New York City, right? And it was from a community mostly Black or people of color who were gay, trans, queer, right? And they created language that was affirming to their identities, their way of being, their community. And it's just like in the lesbian community, whether we talk about, the butch femme binary that was created in the late 1940s and the lesbian bars, right? Before the word lesbian came about, language has always been created by us. It's for us. So I feel like I want to empower you to create that language. And I think it's the same thing within, whether it be the ASL community or the BSL community, but to start creating language that feels affirming. And you don't need permission, because it's you, it's how you want to express yourself. And I think this is a beautiful conversation because that's what the Queen's English is. These, like, as I just flipped through, cakes, call, wardrobe, Celestian, category, the chart, I'm in C's. And then if I flip through D's, I have, don't do me. I have family, fairy that we talked about, fruit picker, full house, FTN. These are all words that we created. And we're going to continue to create more because we want to feel affirmed. We want to feel valued. We want to feel visible because we're beautiful. So I say, go for it, Gordy. You be innovative.
Thank you.
But I think beautiful conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Tyrone's just saying, just to add maybe in the reverse, in terms of thinking maybe something which is useful for this debate. There may be deaf people who say they don't want to create new vocabulary in sign language. And so how do we respect individual choice, people who maybe want to use signs which have been in existence for a long time? I mean, I don't know if there's an analogy in for hearing people in the spoken community.
Yes.
There's some people who are like, I want to use traditional signs. I'm not going to use something new.
And I want to say
I think we'll let Jordi go though. Jordi doesn't have to be on camera all the time. They're stuck at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordi.
That's very important. And that's honestly something I address in the Queen's English, because what we don't want to do is not celebrate narratives, right? So if those in, you know, whatever community, if there's language that feels affirming to you, that feels right, and that's the language you want to use, that's valid. But then there's also others in the community, wherever we are, when I say community, wherever you land, that needs other language to feel affirmed, and that's valid. So I wanted to actually take the word queer, because this analogy I think is very helpful. So when we talk about the word queer, right? Queer first was just a term that meant odd, peculiar, right? Then over time, queer was appropriated and it was used as a derogatory term to identify someone who was gay, homosexual, right? And then what was happening in the 1980s during the HIV and AIDS crisis is that there were activists who took the word queer and said, oh, you want to call me queer? Yes, I am queer and I'm proud. I'm proud to be queer, right? And then what happened because of that activism and standing firm and reappropriating that word, that's why we hear the word queer now used oftentimes, you know, with our millennials or Gen Z generation, using queer as this very affirming all catchphrase to say that someone's identity is either non-cisgender or non-heterosexual and or both, right? But we see this lineage of the word queer. Now, what I'm very particular about in the dictionary is that I like to give validity to all narratives. So the validity to say that, you know, guess what, I was brought through an era where the word queer was derogatory. I don't like to use that word to identify myself. I can speak for someone, not me, but just for someone's interpretation to say, queer doesn't feel good to me. I'm not going to use that word. It just doesn't feel good to me, right? But then it's another narrative to say, well, queer feels absolutely great to me. I want to use that word. Queer identifies who I am. Guess what? Both interpretations are so valid, and both interpretations have to be respected, right? We don't dismiss one's interpretation for the other. We just understand that there are two interpretations and we have to be respectful to that. So it's the same as, I feel like this is kind of the same analogy to say with sign language, you know, with BSL or ASL, this is language that feels right. This is what I want to use. But then also, you know, as Gordy or other people wanting to have language that feels right to how they feel in their identity. So again, both are valid, both need to be celebrated and respected. And I think that's the ongoing conversation, that it's not just one right narrative. All of our narratives are right.
Yeah, I think I understand what you said, Chloe, for sure. And also it's interesting in terms of a social construction of identity, maybe with terms within which we're comfortable. I suppose my question is also about maybe linguistically, if we think about the linguistics of it. We know that we have some people who would say, oh, you know, for sign language, they'd be like, oh, I want to create a sign. So this is ACE week. Asexual week at the moment, and you know, now people are saying, oh, how do you sign that? How do you sign asexual? And really at the moment for the Deaf Rainbow UK glossary doesn't have a sign for that, because we don't have a community sign that's emerged at the moment. And sometimes people are like, oh, let's have a neologism, let's have a new sign that we create. But really, for many people, they would just fingerspell asexual. So I think that's also sometimes there's a pressure on Deaf Rainbow to maybe create signs, and we're resistant to that sometimes. We know that there have been terminologies and glossaries that have been developed for science signs or for architecture and engineering. Should we be doing that, do you think? Or is it something which should be more organic? We should see what the communities are using, what people of different identity expressions are using, and then think about using those signs in our glossary. We were just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Oh, Tyrone, that just made me so happy. I got like the good chills. I just love that compassion, you know, where you're like, you identify that there is not a problem, but there is something, there's a need, and there is a need for sign language, right? And you've identified that, but I love the compassion that you're saying and you're taking to say, I know there's a need, but I want this to be a community effort. I want this to be inclusive. I want this to feel good to all. And I think just that approach alone, that is that's what's going to push this forward, you know. And I think they're more like minds. You said before there was a bit of not resistance, but participation in wanting to create this glossary. I think maybe once people know that this is the idea, this is what we want to do, then people are going to come and want to support this, because this is a true need. And in my mind, I already have individuals, particularly in the US, that are like, oh, absolutely, I would love to do this. So I think it's a combination of both. I think, you know, it's the resources, right? Since this is, you know, Asexual Week, ACE Week, right? Like, of course, it would be absolutely appropriate and affirming that someone who identifies as asexual, you know, is the one to help say, hey, you know, I feel like this feels right, you know. And not to say we have to stand on what this sign is, but I think that's the type of resource and research that to do, because there is a need to create these signs. I think it's really beautiful, and I do hope that we just have more of these conversations. And so I guess my I guess thoughts on this, it feels like how I created this dictionary. It feels like understanding that there's a need and finding those resources and bringing them into the conversation to say, you know, how does it feel like, how do we need to create an asexual sign? Or, you know, should we just spell it out? Or, you know, does it feel good to do this with the sign? And, you know, how do we create the bisexual sign? Because the other thing is, it is a community effort, and it is someone saying, okay, this is what it is. That's how we got the pride flag. That's how, you know, the bisexual pride flag was created, the non-binary pride flag was created. It's because people are working together. And I do hope, you know, that's going to be the same thing when we, you know, create signs for identities.
Geordie would like to make another contribution. So Hannah, can you allow Geordie to turn the camera back on, please? Here we go. Hi. Yeah. What was I going to say? So, related to what you've both just said, Tyrone and Chloe. Sorry, my mind's gone blank all of a sudden. Right, here we go. Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to bring up. So there's that question about whether or not we should create our own signs for specific things. So there's two things I wanted to say about that. Queer as a word. I've seen a lot of different variations of signs for queer. For myself, I sign it like this. It's, you know, especially because there are lots of words that start with a Q, so I like to add the rainbow because that really shows that you're referring to the LGBTQ plus definition of queer. But I've seen a lot of different variations of queer as a sign, and it's very individual. It's personal choice as to how we want to use that. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was non-binary. And I know that there are some established signs, non-binary, for this, for example, but I don't use that sign with one finger tapping the side of your nose. That doesn't feel right for me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel it looks a bit too much like the sign for pretend. So to me, that means pretend, and I'm not pretend, I'm real. And I'm a trans person and my identity is completely valid. So I don't know where that started. I don't know what its etymology is, but yeah, there are lots of different ways of signing that. But yeah, there seems to be this established sign that I personally just really don't like and don't identify with. I just wanted to yeah, add that in, and also that there's the sign NB for non-binary. Tyrone said, "Thank you for contributing." Yeah, there's no way of saying, you know, what language is right and what language is wrong. Sometimes it's a matter of saying, "Oh, I sign it this way," but not everybody has to. And if someone disagrees with the use of that sign, like using the sign NB for non-binary, you have some people who say, you know, deaf people don't know what that means, or, you know, what does this sign for non-binary on the side of your nose, what does that sign mean? And most people in a deaf audience, for example, wouldn't necessarily know what that new sign meant if you saw it out of context or without any explanation. So it seems to be that those signs are used more by people trying to identify themselves, or people using like they them pronouns. It's all about identity and making sure you're balancing expressing your identity and finding the right language for that, but also having an audience that can understand it and making sure that other people can understand what you mean by what you say, even if you're using that language that feels right for you. That's a very complicated act to balance.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I agree. Yeah. I think it goes back to the notion of, you know, identity and how we bring ourselves into the space, right? So I think with me, how I bring myself into the space, I can, even on a talk like this, I say my name, you know, Chloe, but I also bring myself into the space to acknowledge where I fit into the community, right? That I'm bisexual, or that I'm demisexual, biromantic. I say those terms, I introduce those terms, and I do find that maybe people don't understand what, you know, biromantic or demisexual is. And so I then continue to say, well, you know, there is a spectrum, of course, with, you know, sexual attraction or your sexual orientation. And, you know, when it comes sexually, you can be allosexual to have, you know, sexual yearnings, or you can be asexual to have no sexual yearnings or lack of sexual yearnings. And then demi is in the middle, right? And that's kind of where I fit. So I explain that, and it's like, oh, so now when I say it again, there's context, there's understanding. And, you know, if I say, oh yes, and I'm biromantic, because it's not just your, you know, sexual orientation, but it's also your romantic orientation. And that doesn't have to be that type of physical intimacy that we talk about, but it's also our feelings and our emotions and our minds. And I'm also biromantic, right? So that means that my romantic attractions are to more than one gender, right? So I think it's also leading with that, where it's like I introduce language that people don't understand, but I think when I give a little bit more context, then now we're all involved into this conversation and understanding more about self. And I think that's okay, because not only did I tell you the language of my identity, but I also explained how it fits on me, right? So I think it's one of those things, again, that language is so personal. And I think it's one of those things of celebrating that. So again, I understand totally, Tyrone, what you're saying, like, it's so complex, and because it just doesn't fit neatly into a box of understanding. But I think that's okay sometimes, you know, that we don't have to conform and put a stamp on things. But I think society has trained us to think we have to, but we don't.
Fab. I wanted to ask you, Chloe, in general, with the use of English. Tyrone has frozen. I'm just going to ask him to clarify.
Max just asked, there was a problem with the tech.
So yeah, I'll just ask that again. So I wanted to ask you, Chloe, world, meaning necessarily. There are some people who are
Sorry, I think the question is, there are some contexts. Are there, and that doesn't really happen in the deaf world, and also in terms of like lexical language speaking communities. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Is that something that's needed?
I missed the last part, sorry.
Me, but protect.
I do believe in documentation of language. I do. And I like to just bring in different scenarios. I created this dictionary so that way it is documentation of language that is used and try to do the proper use of language and also give credit to the communities that created language. Because left out again because they're not part of the majority narrative. And I can talk particularly about race, where I felt that there's a lot of language within the Black community or the Black gay and queer community, Black gay, trans and queer community that is used and appropriated, but is not used right, is used flippantly, and not given credit. And so I found that there was power in documentation and having a resource that said this is how it's used and this is also who created it. So I do feel power in that type of documentation, right? And so I think I also feel the same, with your question, Tyrone, that I think there is power in that because you get to assist with the narrative and making sure that that narrative is respectful, compassionate, and inclusive, because this is your life, this is your community, and you want to have making sure that it's done in a way that is righteous and respectful and right, And I guess I would say, I would love to understand too how I can assist as the Queen's English, as having this platform. How could I assist in making sure we have this resource? Because I absolutely feel that it is a need, and immediately, in the versions to come, it just has to be included because it's imperative.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about my issue with Deaf Rainbow UK at the moment. With our glossary, obviously we've got all of this, vocabulary and stuff. We're asking people to contribute their time to make these films. They're voluntary. They're all volunteers. There's no profit. There's no pay from anything. It's all our committee and it's all volunteers from our community to create these videos with these different signs in. So, we don't have that kind of funded bit of research. We're just doing it all on a voluntary basis, and we've applied for funding, but it's always a very difficult question. There's always that gap, that funding gap. It's all voluntary in our community rather than having paid people.
I understand. This was the same process. So I do understand, and I would like to assist you in funding as much as I can. So I think that's just something we'll talk more about, because I think that it's a need, and however, whether it's financial power, that I can assist in any type of way. I don't have a lot, but I will assist. Or even if it's just, helping drive in the type of volunteers that we need, I just think that it's imperative, and I believe in what you're doing. We will work together so that way we will all grow together. So I will take on some responsibility as well. Tyrone, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really great. We're excited to see how the collaboration can work. I want to check again. Do any members of the audience have any questions? I've been here for we've been here for almost an hour. Do we have questions on terminology or specifically for Chloe? Anyone? I think Geordie again. Come on, camera on, off we go. Hello, sorry, it is me again. That's fine, no worries. I mean, it's a comment more than anything else. I was just thinking about, in terms of the glossary, of course, we would want to grow the glossary, and of course, we want to ask deaf members of the community. But if we're also thinking about historical usages of BSL within queer spaces, so gay and lesbian, it'd be really interesting to know where did those signs originate from? It'd be really interesting to see if there's, it seems like there are other things like pan or asexual, there didn't seem to be signs. And it's interesting to know, why is it there are signs for gay and lesbian and not? But that's more just of a comment about, it would be really interesting to find out some of the historical etymologies of some of the terminology used in the community. Yeah, thank you, Geordie. And also, we know that there was GSV, gay sign variation, and that was often very specifically used by gay deaf community themselves, LGBTQ plus community within queer spaces. So, you know, signs for fabulous, or signs which are very much exaggerated. So remote control would be like, oh, this long object that you have to touch, and buoyant signs as well. So we know that there was that identity expression that we saw in the 80s and 90s, maybe 70s, 80s and 90s. That seems to have faded a little, but that's definitely an important historical part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and maybe something that needs to be documented before it's lost.
I agree. And I think that's also what I mean, the power of documentation, because, you know, it's history and it's beautiful history, and we don't want to create erasure. We want to understand our past so we know where the future is, right? So I also agree, and I think it's so interesting, you know, because a big part of the Queen's English is dive into the etymology of language and how words evolved from the 1920s all the way now to, you know, the 2020s. And it's interesting to see the narratives and what was happening in different time periods. And it's a beautiful thing to know, understand, and see the lineage.
Yeah, I agree, for sure. Okay, so we've almost arrived at 6 o'clock. So I just want to check. I mean, I think we have a very quiet audience, I have to say, this evening, which is fine, Chloe, but I am slightly surprised. Yep, it seems I haven't missed any questions. Okay, so let me just check my notes a moment. So one maybe linguistic question or language-based question. As Geordie has already explained, you can be trans non-binary. But to sign that in BSL, I think sometimes people are, oh, how do you explain that? Is that something that you sign or explain? I think some deaf people are wanting to have just a single sign which expresses that concept, but obviously there's diversity within the community and communities. And also somebody may be transgender or trans and not, that doesn't mean they're going from one gender to another. And again, sometimes that means we have to be very mindful of the language that we're using. I mean, I think that's one of the things that some of these ideas are very new to deaf communities. And so it's hard to think about how we talk about them. I don't know if that chimes with you a little bit, Chloe.
No, it does. I mean, it's just the ongoing conversation. It's the present ongoing conversation with identity. Understanding that it varies and it's personal, and some words just don't fit everyone, and that's okay. But just I guess is the conversation and how to present that, to say, okay, this individual, like you were saying, you know, this individual is, you know, identifies with TGNC, right? And what is the sign for that? Versus, you know, this individual is like, no, actually, I'm trans feminine, or, you know, transgender, or, you know, or actually, no, I prefer non-binary, you know what I mean? And it's equal weight, whether it's the sign of it or whether it's the actual word of it, it's equal weight for that person because it is an ongoing conversation because it's someone's identity and everyone wants to feel affirmed and full in their identity and not have to suppress themselves to just one idea or the majority idea. So, you know, what you're actually asking is the ongoing conversation.
And Chloe, just one more question that occurs to me. Did you have any cross-language comparisons? So maybe with French or Italian or other language communities, do they have their own dictionaries or was it just a US, UK?
Yes, so
No.
I focused on the US and then focused on bringing the history and more so the history with the UK. But no, I focused because this was originally a US edition. And so I just focused on that language because language, I mean, diving into, you know, language and the gay and queer, you know, community in Germany or the gay and queer community, you know, in South Africa. I mean, there's language in every community, right? So I did just focus on the US and then it was translated, well, history and research was done for the UK. Those are the two communities, but I mean, it can grow. And you know, us even just, of course, just talking about, you know, BSL, you know, or ASL, right? Then it is also that language. And when we're actually talking about the creation of that. So this is an ongoing thing. And sometimes it's a beautiful feeling of being overwhelmed, but it's a beautiful feeling where, you know, it's a need. And you know, I think a need to articulate who we are.
I think I've frozen again. Darren is saying.
That's okay.
Sorry, everybody. Can you see me? Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for having me for this wonderful conversation. I mean, I feel like I've learned so much and it's kind of the resource in my research that I did in the thought process of creating the dictionary, you know, what, of course, that Rainbow UK wants to do with the glossary. It's very parallel. It's very parallel.
so I think there's also one question somebody was wanting to ask. If you've also seen how personal culture and age may affect how somebody's sexual identity is related in the kind of language that they use.
Absolutely.
So it was asked in the chat, yeah.
Yes, so that's also why I wanted to document the spectrum of language because let's say in the, you know, 1940s, again, I spoke about, you know, the language of butch and femme, right, creating the lesbian community and how the Kiki girl was actually the one who either did not want to present herself in a way that was just feminine or just masculine, or did not just want to solely be attracted to someone who was more butch if she was femme, or someone who was more femme if she's butch. And that was the language before lesbian. And then also based on, you know, cultural background, I talk a lot about the ballroom scene, the language of the ballroom scene, the language of the Black gay community, and that language, the language of the indigenous, you know, Americans, and having the word two-spirit, right, to identify someone who basically also could be non-binary, non-conforming, but someone who wasn't just strictly positioned in those binary ideas of just being male, female, masculine, feminine. But yes, age, I call this intersectionality. So when we talk about age and background, cultural background and race and language, it's the intersectionality of identities and what that looks like. Because, being queer and being Muslim is a very different experience with, being white and being 60 and being gay, or, being Asian and being trans and being 16. I mean, these experiences are different, and it's the intersectionality of identities that actually helps govern, well, not govern, but help implement language, because these identities are very, very different. So that's what the Queen's English was about, was having this language included that show that intersectionality of identities, because that's what I was finding wasn't available. It was very focused on one narrative, and often that narrative was either gay and lesbian, often just white. And it just wasn't inclusive to, again, that spectrum of identity.
Yeah, I agree completely. Absolutely. So we do have some work happening with in Deaf Rainbow UK, trying to, we have some work in England. We're trying to also reach out to Wales and Scotland and different communities as well, the Black community, for example. But it's quite difficult to, there aren't that many people that we've been in contact with, and it's quite difficult to get engagement as well. So one of the problems is making sure that we're meeting their agenda rather than driving our agenda. Black Lives Matter has often been something which, members of deaf Black communities have really been focused on in the last year or so, and this may not be something that's their priority at the moment. So it's something which we need to have a continuing conversation about. It's not something that we can finish, but obviously with staff and funding, that would probably put us in a different position than we're in now. So thank you very much, Chloe. I think that's just been a great discussion. Thanks very much. Really great quality discussion. I mean, a quiet audience, I have to say, but thank you very much. And obviously we've recorded this, and this will be available on our website, probably maybe Monday or Tuesday, so people can review that and then think about when we're moving forwards, and then hopefully, who knows, we'll find a rich benefactor who can help us move forwards. Hopefully that'll be a wonderful movement for this after this meeting. Wonderful development.
Thank you. Thank you again, Tyrone, for having me, and thank you to Christopher and Max for being amazing interpreters. Thank you to Hannah. Thank you, Lisa. So thank you so much for having me, and also just supporting the work of the Queen's English and understanding the need and the celebration. I've absolutely loved this conversation.
Thank you so much. But just personally, I wanted to thank you, Chloe, for your contribution. Thank you to Max, thank you for Christopher, our interpreters, thank you to Lisa, our captioner, just the whole team. Thank you so much. Thank you for making it work so smoothly. And thank God I'm not in charge of all the tech. Yeah, meetings are all a bit all a bit of a nightmare. I might throw away my router at the end of all this. But yeah, I think we're going to close this meeting now. I want to thank everybody for being here today. And yeah, big thank you and goodbye. Bye all.